In the Project Eden's Garden fanbase, there's this very well-known and beloved fan and theory crafter named the Humbugg, and as it turns out, he's also an accomplished writer for several Fangans. And I actually got to interview him about the Fangan writing process, and we had this amazing and very long conversation that really only gets better. So if you enjoyed this interview, we might actually follow it up with a sort of fun writing exercise where we'll walk through the process of making a Fangan concept with the help of some funny RNG, and hopefully both demonstrate the process and also just make something entertaining and have some fun along the way. So let us know if you'd like to see that, and enjoy the interview. Can you briefly introduce yourself and describe your history with writing in Fangans?
Alright, of course. Hello everyone, I'm Humbugg, and currently I am a writer on Danganronpa Law & Order as well as the Uzujigoku Massacre. I have my own project as well, but that's currently in the early stages. I've been working on Fangans since I believe 2021, primarily as a writer, and I've been writing for, at this point, well, since I can remember, but I've been taking it seriously for about 6 to 7 years now.
Cool. You've mentioned to me before that the Uzujigoku Massacre is the project that you've learned the most from working on it. So can you talk about your experience there and what you've learned and stuff like that?
My experiences with Tom, it's certainly been, of all the Fangans I've worked on, which are many, might I say, it's definitely been the most educational experience, for the simple fact it's the one where I've been the most involved in all facets of writing and production. Beyond that, I'm also quite close with a lot of the staff. Indeed, I joined the writing team as a favor to the directors because I was already close with them. And a lot of not only the skills I've learned as a writer as of late, but just generally understanding how a Fangan is made, especially one at the scale of the Uzujigoku Massacre. I've learned it from that project. So learning about not only how the writing pipeline works, but also the art pipeline, music pipelines, all these sorts of things, it really has enlightened me as to the every detail that goes into making a Fanganronpa and all the pieces that need to come together to create a finished product at the end of things.
Ah, I see. So that's been sort of your window into the whole pipeline in like a more organized manner, perhaps, than other Fangans you've been on?
Yeah, I would definitely say that because a lot of the Fangans I've worked on, it's not a thing against their professionalism, not in the slightest, but Tom is probably the one I've been most involved in as a member of staff. Yeah, so it's been a very enlightening perspective into things.
What would you say the writing department's relationship is with the art, music, design, programming, all the other stuff?
For this one, I'm also going to answer from just like the general perspective of other Fangans I've worked on. When it comes down to it, ultimately the writing team, it's not like they're in charge of the other departments. Ultimately, those are under the director. But from my experience and from what I've heard and seen, a more successful project is one where the writing team is more able to collaborate and interact with the other departments and vice versa. Like, if the writing team isn't in the loop with what's going on with the art, the modeling, the music, all of that, all of a sudden it means that all these assets being made, rather than writers being able to say, yeah, we need this sort of asset, or we're probably going to need this sort of asset, or this isn't unnecessary, or this is unnecessary, they're going to have to sort of make do with what they're given, and at times it can very easily create make it feel more haphazard in how the production of a game goes, and vice versa. Ultimately, a lot of people in a Fangan, they're not writers, which means that they don't exactly have the same perspective as a writer, but that can end up being a good thing because oftentimes those are the perspectives that help bring in ideas that really elevate a story. So like with scenario writing, with character dialogue, with backstories, with all of that, sometimes you need a sort of, let's say, outside perspective in order for you to make a decision where like, yeah, this is what helps the story most. And this isn't just something for a specific Fangan or for a few Fangans. This is something that I would say applies to not just Fangans in general, actually, but any sort of project that involves a big team.
That definitely makes sense because sometimes it can be easy to forget that writing comes first in the process of developing a story-heavy game. I sort of lost my train of thought. I was about to say more, but I am not a yapper, unlike you. Do you think from a fan perspective the art sort of overshadows the writing when it comes to gravitating towards certain projects over others, but also forgiving the writing or not being so forgiving for the writing based on how it's presented visually and audio as well?
From a fan perspective, ultimately, I'm going to say a lot of the time, yes. However, right, a strong artistic direction, all those things, they are oftentimes what get people in to a thing, and it's what entices people, makes them see like, wow, this game, like, or game or series or what have you, has like a lot of things going on. I want to like check it out. However, if the writing falls apart, you're not going to keep an audience around a lot, in the slightest. And that I would point simply to, there's a lot of written Fangans that don't have any art associated with them, or very few. Like, one of my favorite Fangans is A Stormy Last Hurrah, and aside from some basic CGs and character introduction sheets, that is just a completely written Fangan, and it's fairly popular, I would say. However, it's undeniable that at the end of the day, if you don't have a strong art direction, it might be hard to like get people in, because at the end of the day, the art is going to be the first impression a lot of people have, and people can look at a piece of art and decide if they like it much faster than if they read a story and decide if they like it.
That reminds me of something that a friend of mine said, where she said that it's much easier to get feedback on pieces of art because it just takes people a few seconds to look at it, versus writing where it will take someone hours to read through it.
It depends on the type of feedback, though, because if it's something to do with anatomy, for example, it's a lot more easier to pick up on that than something like composition or color theory, right? Because people can recognize when anatomy is off whack, so it's very easy. And with writing, stuff like grammatical issues and big plot holes, an outside perspective is always going to be able to pick up on them. But at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to critique art and to provide criticism, constructive criticism specifically on it, rather than writing, because a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So a piece of art can communicate something much faster than a whole story, and makes it, not to say it's a good or bad thing, but it makes it a lot quicker to digest in some cases.
I'm gonna go through a couple of like simple or funny little questions. What's the funniest scene you've written in recent memory?
I won't go into details, but the one that's recent is from my own project, right? And it's near the end of the prologue, and I'll use this to just give some advice as to writing humorous scenes. The best piece of advice I can give you, if it makes you laugh, it's funny, right? And more importantly, if you go back to the script after a couple of weeks and it still makes you laugh, then you know it's going to be a scene that like hits it.
That's so true.
I'm not going to say who, but a character involved in said scene was very fun to write, for the simple fact that they're a bit unserious, but in an endearing way. So that's definitely something that comes to mind.
What you just said is sort of true for like everything. Like, when you look at it right after you make it, you have one opinion, and then when you look at it again after you've forgotten all about it, you might have a whole different opinion.
Yeah, and that's why for proofreading in general, you gotta shelve your script for like a week, I would say, or maybe even 2 weeks. Take the time to work on other parts of the game if you have any responsibilities other than being a writer, or other things that need to be written. And then you go back and like, hey, this doesn't work, or hey, this works, or hey, this works if I change this part of it.
Do you usually have other responsibilities on the teams?
Across the teams I've worked on, in particular Tom, but this is definitely not the only thing that like I've been responsible for, or it's not the only case where I've been responsible for it, is that I found that oftentimes I'll be sort of taking like points when it comes to backstories, when it comes to general lore and stuff like that. Mainly because if, for example, on a project they say, "Hey, we want X to happen. Can you make it look like, this was our idea this was our intention from the very beginning?" Or, "Hey, that it makes complete sense." I can usually find a way to leverage all the events going on in a story, or logic my way into making it like, yeah, guys, X was always going to happen. Why else? What else would you think?
You've got the puzzle pieces brain.
Yeah, pretty much.
Would you say you're like particularly good at making like puzzles for the viewer to figure out?
Maybe not puzzles in the strict sense of like something to outright be solved, but I've spent a lot of time making theories on Fangans, and because of that, I started bringing the mindset of like, oh, when I write something, every line needs to have a reason to be there, and ergo, I wrote Tom's teaser, right, the one that dropped a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so when writing that, all I'm going to say is that like every single part of it, I was giving weight. I was like, what every line, every chance I put something in there such that when you realize what it means, you'll be like, wow, it's been there staring at my face. And so I don't know how I'd say it. I wouldn't call it necessarily puzzle making, but I put out the effort to make sure that like anyone who's paying attention and anyone who's like quick on the draw gets rewarded for it,
Oh, that's really cool. Would you say it's more like crumbs for the theorizers to latch onto and like see if they can get it right? Or would you say it's more of a hindsight? Like you can't really reasonably figure it out unless you like get lucky with your guess, but later you'll find out and you'll realize in hindsight?
Both. I would say both. To some degree, it's like, oh, sometimes I also like to mess with the viewer and be like, oh, if you have this theory in your mind, I want to put something in where like it seems like it would validate it, even though it's completely wrong. And I'm just talking in a general point of view, right? At other times, I'm like, yeah, I want to leave stuff in there because, as a theorist myself, I gotta like feed my people.
What do you think of the ultimate theorizer, ultimate theory crafter talent that the Project Eden's Garden people were talking about giving you?
Humbugg is would it be right to say a notorious theory crafter in our Discord?
Ultimate theorist.
The ultimate theorist.
ultimate theorist.
Honestly,
Matt,
yeah. No. Oh, he's gonna clip this and like put this all over his profile.
He's gonna put this in his new video.
So Humbugg,
you know
also
it's
known
happening.
as the ultimate theorist of Project Eden's
The
Garden.
fact that we called him the ultimate theorist, he's gonna hold on to that.
Yeah.
He's going to hold on to that like it's everything from.
It makes me blush. I can't even lie because, like every now and then, I'll be talking with people not even in like the Eden's Garden server, and it's kind of weird, but I get recognized more often for being like the guy who makes theories for PEG than like any project I've written for, which is like it's a massive honor because I've been in that community for 4 years, so it makes me really happy to hear that. And at the same time, it's not weird, but it's like it's a new experience for me. I'm not used to like meeting people who know who I am before I know who they are,
Yeah, just like, what do you mean I'm famous? What do you mean I'm in this server with thousands of people who see me talk?
Yeah, no, I've spoken with like people who like I would call friends, right? And they were like, yeah, my first impression of you wasn't from talking to you, it was from that video. And it's like, wow.
Yeah. Sometimes you like do stuff in public spaces and you don't realize just like how many people are watching.
That's a lesson I need to learn one day for multiple reasons.
Yeah, the other day someone recognized me for being an admin on the Your Turn to Die server, and I was like, what? Who recognizes me as that? That never happens, what?
Oh god, I remember I was in the VC for like a Fangan server, and I was also talking about Fangan writing in there extensively, right? And I was talking to some people, and like we were getting along, and then one of them was like, "Wait, aren't you that Humbugg from the Fury video?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that guy, I am."
Have your people, the theorizers, ever influenced your writing decisions?
No,
No?
yeah, just a straight no. And this applies to every Fangan I've ever worked on, right? It's like I love reading theories because at the end of the day, a theory is oftentimes just as much as a reflection on the theory crafter as it is on the work itself, right? But I would be amiss to look at a theory and be like, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to steal that. It feels like I'm not Scott Kaufman, you know? I can't do that.
I do think there's room to like take inspiration from stuff without like copying it, but it is difficult.
Yeah, I usually err on the side of caution, and I just sort of like I read theories, right? To anyone who's made a Tom theory before or a theory on any project I've worked on, rest assured, I've seen it. Like they never influenced me, right? So if your theory turns out to be right or wrong, that's not because not just me, but like the teams that I've been a part of, we saw and we were like, yeah, we need to make sure this is right or wrong. It's either luck or congrats, you called it right. Good job.
That's cool. What percent creator and what percent fan are you?
100% both.
That's a good answer.
For sure. For sure, right? Like, I would consider myself a Fangan fiend, right? But at the same time, I would say being a creator is really an extension of being a fan of, like, well, there are certainly, like, Fangan creators who aren't that involved in, like, looking at Fangans. I know I work with a lot of them. I'm kind of an abnormality in the grand scheme of things. But being a creator, like, it doesn't exclude, and frankly, it's just a extension of being a fan of Fanganronpa, you know?
Do you think that's like more unique to fanganronpas or fan works, or true in general of all creators?
You have to be a fan of what you're making or the genre you're working in order to like really be effective in it, right? But like I think there's a distinction between being like 100% fan, 100% creator for like an original murder mystery, right? And for being a Fangan, because the Fangan community in itself it's not like a completely unique thing. It does like have overlap with like competition fic fandoms and whatnot, but like it's got its own like vibe and culture around it, you know?
Sort of the particular storm of the way the Danganronpa fandom developed and the way the creatives in them like came together.
That's how I put it. Yep.
Yeah. How is the writing influenced by the presentation format? So whether it's like a game or a video series or an audio drama or just like straight up text? And
That's a really good question.
And do you prefer some formats over others as a writer?
Wow. Okay. So the first part of that question is that I'm gonna use a good example. Tetro Danganronpa Pink is an audio drama, and not even just like my observations, as like the director Vanas put it. At the end of the day, things aren't on screen, which yeah, no wonder it is indeed an audio drama. But because of that, the dialogue ultimately has to be. It needs to guide you through a scene, and it needs to allow you to like create an image, right? If like Tetra was a game, to continue using this example, some lines wouldn't need to exist. You would be able to see what's going on. If it was a web series, again, same thing. Another thing is characterization. That is just straight up like a big thing, because that's something a game is always going to have above the other mediums. You have free time events. You can integrate them a lot more like seamlessly in a game than compared to a web series or a fanfic or an audio drama or dance or what have you.
So like you just have more time for characters, for individual characters, because you get to choose as a player which one to hang out with?
Not even necessarily time. Yeah, it really helps that you can pick who to hang out with in the free time events, right? But even if a web series was longer than a game, the structure of a game and the fact that there are, for example, flavor text, there are free time events you can choose to watch or not watch, interact with or not interact with, means that to some degree, the experience is more tailored to a person. Whereas with another picture, yeah, in a web series, you can skip the episodes of a character's free time events you don't want to see. But oftentimes that is less picking and more so just choosing to ignore certain aspects of it. And to that end, the dialogue in a game can oftentimes get away with like having a character say less about themselves throughout the course of it, because you can bank on, if someone cares about this character, they can check their free time events. Whereas in every other medium, it's like, no, you have to make sure that the key parts of a character are laid out for them, because of the fact that it's not a guarantee that it's not a guarantee that people will see their free time events. It's the simple fact that what free time events there are linear. There's no customization of that. It's in essence a part of the story. It kind of be like if Danganronpa's free time events, you can pick who you hung out with. It's like, you have a specific person to hang out with each time. To that effect, I'm a big fan of the audio drama format. I like when it comes to web series, I'm kind of like, it's not that I dislike them. It's just more so that it's the same reason why I read manga and I don't watch animes, because with manga I can control the pace at which I read them, whereas anime, no, the pace is set. And games, who doesn't like a good video game? Written fanfic, I also like a good written fanfic. And at the end of the day, a good story is just going to be a good story to me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't know what it is with videos in particular that are just... It does feel lesser than the other formats, but it's not entirely clear to me exactly why. Audio dramas are also on a set timeline, but a lot of the time they feel more immersive than video format.
I think it helps that in an audio drama, literally every line is you are hearing these characters talk. A web series can choose to skirt this by having character lines not be voiced 100%. They can use the audio byte system that a game employs, which is a good thing, by the way, because it cuts down on the insane amount of resources a Fangan already requires.
Actually, sort of on a related note, how much do you tend to rely on non-verbal cues, visual information and character actions over dialogue?
I'm not as militant as on the idea of show don't tell as other writers can be, and so if I feel like a character in any project I'm working on would speak on something, I will use that. That's just how the character is, even if it seems annoying to someone watching on, you cannot change the fact that perhaps, your character is a bit annoying. But at the end of the day, I feel like, especially if you're working in a format that allows you to display things visually, as in a web series or a game, you would be amiss to not take advantage of that. Of course, where time permits. I know many of Fangan in both formats will often use the pure black CG whenever stuff is going on, and allow the characters internal monologue to describe it, which I get, because again, that's a lot of resources you would have to dedicate to it otherwise.
Yeah. Since I've been writing my own V3 sequel, I've had this scene that I was I really don't want to draw this, or plan out a whole background for this short part where this inconsequential thing happens. So I was what if I have the character pass out and wake up when it's over? Sometimes I'm just I want the production quality, but not the work that comes with it.
No, honestly, that's real. And even then, as long as literally every scene in a game isn't just a black CG, at which point you're kind of come on, dude, either bite the bullet or find help. It should be fine. It should be more than fine, because I'll be real, a Fangan that isn't just being backed by a massive team you can get away with just having like 1-2 big CGs, you know?
Mhm.
Like, I'm serious when I say that. Per chapter, of course. 1-2 in the whole game? Maybe. Maybe if they're really good.
I think once you set up the expectation for CGs to exist, you have to commit to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The moment there's one CG in your game, it's like, yeah, you know what you signed up for, buddy. Like,
Yeah.
you gotta see it through.
Yeah. I feel like there was a follow-up question in there, and it has passed my mind. The moment has passed.
Darn it. Oh, well, what can you do?
Alright, back to the list. How do you think about characters' default behavior, like how they act in like normal interactions and small-scale characterization?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. When it comes to thinking about like a character's characterization, a good habit to get into is, I remember earlier I was talking to you and I said, oh, I love rotating the thumbcast in my head like rotisserie chickens.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that's a
Amazing
good
quote,
habit
by the
to
way.
get into. Thank you. I said it myself. A good habit to get into is to start like looking at your characters and asking simple questions about them. If you've ever seen one of those character sheets, we'll have questions of like, oh, what's your character's favorite ice cream flavor? That is a very superfluous, very simple question that realistically would never come up in a Fangan. However, taking the time to think about, oh, what is my character's favorite ice cream flavor? As long as you're not just like pulling out an answer like, oh, it's strawberry because why not? You're gonna get something out of it. So when it comes to the minutia of a character and how they interact with the things around them, the best way to do it is really to either just think about it or better yet, write it out. Writing out scenes of your character, like just going about their day-to-day life, is oftentimes one of the best ways to really get a handle on how they act and how they behave. Because the best way to write is to keep writing. The best way to get better at writing is to keep writing. And that applies to characterization. If you want to know more of the broad strokes, like if you have a character, you're like, oh, I understand the like big picture of them, but like how do they interact on a day-to-day basis? Throw them into those day-to-day basis situations and see how they react. As long as you're consciously writing them out, you're going to figure it out. Trust me.
Mm-hmm. I have this like sort of writing app that I haven't used that much, but my friend recommended it to me and I thought it was kind of interesting. The one thing that it does that I found interesting is that it gives you all this like big old form for you to fill out about your character. It asks you about its job, and then right after it says job satisfaction, and that kind of made me pause and go like, that's an interesting question to put in a character sheet. And it has like health and pets. Under personality as skills and competence, talent, weakness, hobbies, habits, moral, self-control, motivation, discouragement, confidence level, greatest fear. And it's like, in just like trying to fill out this sort of thing, it makes you think about characters in a more complex way, I think. The fields may not even be relevant to you, but they'll make you think.
Yeah, precisely, because I think like this is a pitfall that I myself like tend to fall into. When you have a character and you know like their fate in the story, whether they live or die and when and where, it kind of gets like easy to start thinking about them from the perspective of like, oh, my character is like dies in like chapter 2, or my character dies in chapter 4, or my character actually just lives the whole game. And then it's like, okay, we just need to like think about it from that perspective. But if you do that, all of a sudden you're gonna wind up reducing them to just like their position in the death order. And sure, yeah, if like someone just wants to see like heads rolled, then that's fine with them. But like if you want to like do them justice, so to speak, it's a very harmful thing to do to your writing. And I want to point out job satisfaction in particular is probably one of the, if not most important questions to ask regarding a Fangan, because unless you elect to go down the path of, oh, they're just not ultimates at all, a character's relationship with their ultimate and their ultimate, I would consider, is one of, if not the most important detail about their characters. I know a lot of like writers will say that, oh, you should think about their talents last, or you should just leave it till the end, develop the personalities, and then figure out their talent. But I would say I would disagree with that perspective, because at the end of the day, we are making fanganronpas. We're not making typical death games. We're not making an original death game. We're not making a Danganronpa adjacent death game. We are making a Fanganronpa. We are taking the some, if not all, of Kodaka's world building for like a fan project. And as such, a character's ultimate is deeply important to them. All I will say is that you need to make sure that you're thinking about their ultimate and their personality in tandem. One cannot be more important than the other, because a student's ultimate is the reason they're accepted into Hope's Peak or whatever equivalent you have in your story. And for a lot of your cast, it's going to inadvertently be the reason they die. It's something that needs to be given a lot of weight. And if you're like actively engaging with like their talents and what it means to them, right? Job satisfaction or ultimate satisfaction, it gives you a lot of opportunity to be like, oh, my character likes their talents because of this and that, which allows me to develop their character in such a way. Or my character dislikes their talent because of this and that, which allows me to develop their character in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't leave it for last, is my bottom line. I would actually make it one of the first things I come up with a character. However, I would also come up with their name first, so don't get too like trigger happy, you know what I'm saying?
You come up with their name first?
When it comes to my cast, for my project, the first thing I came up with, honestly, was their nationalities. And then their names, then their titles, then some basic overview, and then the death order, which changed a fair bit as I started developing the themes and things. That's also another good piece of advice. Don't be afraid to change things at all, you know, and be willing to like really sit with the themes and ideas of each, not only the whole game, but each chapter, you know, because each chapter, unless you're going with a concurrent release or you're releasing the whole game in one, which is a very, Fangans have done it before. Laps did it with its chapter 3 and 4 and 5 release. It's definitive edition, but I would say it's probably not the best idea. But if you are going for that, even then, each chapter should be considered something on its own. They all have to flow into one another, of course, but if someone plays like through all of chapter 1 and they're like, well, I'm going to play the rest tomorrow, they should walk away wanting to play chapter 2 while at the same time being satisfied with chapter 1, being like, yeah, this was a story that built off the prologue that had themes of its own that I enjoyed, for example.
Wait, so why do you do the names so early in the process? I'm curious because I know a lot of people, probably most people, do names pretty early in the process, but I don't know why.
For one, I think it's kind of like extends to my projects, like something specific about my project where like each of the characters is from a different country, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I named them early just so I knew I wouldn't have to worry about going back and making sure like everything made sense. I still had to, by the way, a couple of characters had their names changed after I did some further research.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond that, it allows you to like sort of, I had a basic idea of where I wanted the characters to go in terms of their story. And so with that, I was able to give them like names where I felt like, yeah, this represents something that I want them to have. Or with some characters, it was names of people I knew of. And I was like, yeah, this is something I want to give them. After that, I did the LinkedIn test, which is what I call just searching up their name on LinkedIn and seeing if a real person has said name. If they do, then it passes the test.
That is a way of testing names that I've not heard of, but sounds viable. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. There are like a couple characters I couldn't use it on, but that's because of that was because outside of the LinkedIn test, I was able to verify, yeah, this is a real name that someone from this place would have. Or in a specific case, it's not, but there's a reason for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes there's like characters that need made-up names that don't exist, and that's also a deliberate choice.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you decide on the ultimate talents?
It's a mixed bag. Like, I'm just gonna use my like project because that's the one where like, yeah, that's the one where I was like the most in control of like the very beginning, right? My protagonist is the ultimate graphic novelist because one, I have a personal history of writing comics, so this is something like, yeah, I want to see my rep in here. And two, it was because of the whole like closing argument section that every trial has. I was like, yeah, wouldn't it be cool if like there was an actual graphic novelist doing these sort of things? Some characters, they have their talents picked because I believe it ties into their character very strongly. Some of it is an extension of their backstories and the circumstances around them, where it's like, yeah, if this person would be an ultimate, it would be this talent. Some of them are kind of silly. Like there's one character who is the ultimate adventurer, and I changed her title from polyglot to adventurer because I wanted her to still speak a lot of languages, but I also wanted to give her a bomber jacket.
Yeah. Sometimes the cool factor is the deciding factor, and I think that's okay.
Yeah. The rule of cool is a lot more effective than one would think. But I will say this, you gotta like have a strong handle on what is cool, which is why you can't really use it until you've read a lot or you've seen a lot, you know?
Yeah, you need to have seen a lot of cool things in order to make cool things.
Exactly.
Yeah. To what extent do you think about cast diversity in different projects? Like for your project, do you have like different nationalities for everyone? Was there like a reason for that?
You went back to Ultimate Program. That's the simple way of putting it. Another thing is when it comes to diversity, I'm going to like approach diversity from the aspect of like literally any way someone can be like diverse, right? In particular, I've always been a fan of anthropology as well as ethnography, right? So like ethnic studies. And because of that interest, right, it's kind of led me to know a lot, well, not a lot, but know something about a lot of different places. And in a sense, I felt like if I am to have like a cast like this, I'd really like to approach it from the lens of like making it feel like, yeah, there's a rep for everybody in a sense. I remember I posted like this nationality headcanon chart in like the Eden's Garden community, and seeing a lot of people see some of the more niche flags or niche mixtures of like nationalities and be like, wow, that's literally me. It was like, yeah, I really understand it now why I'm like going for this, you know?
Yeah. What you said about treating diversity as any way a human being can be diverse, to like different human beings can be diverse from each other, I think brought up something that I think about sometimes, where I think something that falls between the cracks sometimes when talking about diversity is that people have this sort of tendency to confuse race for culture, or confuse skin color for culture, which is even odder, and be like, I have a full spectrum of skin tones, and that means we're diverse, which I think kind of misses the point of diversity.
That's a really multifaceted thing, yeah. Because on one hand, like, I understand it, and I definitely understand the idea of like, I can see why someone would conflate it, for the simple fact that, yeah, ultimately in some places, one skin tone does like factor into their social environment, and by a necessary extension, because the social environment is where a culture is developed, the culture of said peoples, right? It's mainly an American-centric point of view, but America is like one of the big like cultural outputs. A lot of fans of like fanganronpas are like Americans, or at the very least, they speak good English, meaning they often see a lot of American content. Granted, like in my experience, I've seen that a lot less because I'm Kuwaiti. I just like live in a wholly different culture, you know? But I get it. I can see why one would conflate the two. And I also recognize the like merit of it, especially because like, yeah, at the end of the day, sometimes it's not even just about having someone who is from your cultural background, just having someone who looks like you in a franchise that like you like and you adore even is a very uplifting thing, even if that character is fighting for their life.
One thing that a friend has said to me that I think is interesting and true is that formats like death games bring out rather unusual bonding experiences between people, and people like to see the sense of relationships forming within death games, and that makes the format more attractive. Just the fact that it forces characters to bond more.
I would agree, yeah. I would say that's the heart of like the Danganronpa format. Not even necessarily the like killing people part. It's the fact that it is an environment that really forces like character dynamics to like pop off, you know? And the thing about a killing game is your cast is not getting bigger. It is not, and even if it does, like in some Fangans, I'm not gonna say them, when it does, that immediately like throws a wrench into things and like blows up like everything going on in the plots. Your cast is always getting smaller, and by extension, every character needs to have like a very well-defined role and like very strong characterization. It's kind of like Pokemon. Every character is gonna be someone's favorite, you know? And
that's so true.
Thanks to that, it just perfectly creates this format where characters need to have strong personalities, because you cannot afford to just have a character be like to have like a milquetoast member of your cast. And an environment where such strong personalities can clash or get along or just get up to no good, that is fun. Just straight up, that is a fun thing to see, and it's something very important to keep in mind if one is to write a Fangan, where like you can't wholly prioritize it. Some Fangans make the mistake of just like focusing on like character interaction. Like, yeah, that's the heart of Danganronpa, but the blood has to go somewhere, you know? There needs to be the individual characters themselves with like strong appeal. And if you only characterize your characters just before they die, or because they're like going to make it to the end, then like you're kind of like setting yourself up there as well. So I'm gonna say.
That's such a good analogy. You have a heart, but the blood needs to go somewhere.
Thank you. I like came up with it on the spot.
I could tell, and it was such a banger. I was like, wow. Yeah, the other elements of the story make up the body versus the character interactions being the heart. That's like a perfect analogy. Wow.
You're making me blush.
How important would you say the setting is in a Fangan, and what do you do for that?
That's a thinker. When it comes to one setting, like you have to consider the fact that like you need to make it realistic that they're getting thrown into a killing game, right? Like, sure, yeah, you're allowed some like insanity because a killing game is already insane enough, but at the same time, too much, and the suspension of disbelief necessary to believe a killing game is happening kind of gets burnt up. Like, you got to be careful with it. And so to the extent of justifying why the killing game is happening, and indeed how the mastermind, if there is one, right, whether they're in the cast or not, how the individuals in charge of the killing game were able to start it, that's important, that's vital, right? You cannot make do without that, even if it's just something like, oh yeah, we live in a society where a killing game shows are actually like massively popular and the mastermind is just like an executive. It's like, yeah, okay, that's all we need to know. Sure, maybe you could develop it if you want to, but you have your base. Go ahead with it. You've got the all clear. Beyond that, it's quite important to like have a setting where it's like you can tell why these characters are the way that they are, right? You can always borrow from real life. You can be like, yeah, this is how it is in the real world, so I'm gonna have this character who's a bit of an exaggerated version of someone you would meet like outside, just in your day-to-day life, but not so much that you can't like immediately realize that, yeah, this is someone that I would be friends with or someone I would care about. And there's a bare minimum, right? But you don't need to develop your setting past the point of why is the killing game happening, how did they get the resources and everything to do it, and why are the characters like this. This applies to all of your characters, by the way, not just the important ones. Important, I say in brackets, you know what I mean. Protagonists, antagonists, support, mastermind, whatever. But if you develop it further, such that it feels like a world that's lived in, it adds massively, because all of a sudden you can add to the ambiance. And even better yet, if you decide like, oh, I want to change something in my story, you could refer to like what you have on your backstory, be like, oh, this is how the world is. So if I want to change A to B, this is how I can justify it. Of course, I would say something like that because that's my specialty, retroactively justifying changes in the story.
I think that's a very good and very funny role to main as a writer.
Yeah, it's like I'm gonna say this. If you're familiar with like my theories and like how I talk about Peg, that's how I talk about my other projects. Except the difference is
You make it
what
real.
I say for my other projects is canon.
Yeah, I really liked that theory that you told me one time in a random VC about, like, it's been a while, so I don't remember all of the details, but I kept referencing it in my playthrough. I was like, this makes me think of that theory that Humbugg told me.
It's like, God. I really like coming up with theories, honestly. It's a writing exercise to me.
What do you think about trying to make every member of the cast equally valuable, or just like a minimum amount of valuable?
You have to. Genuinely, you have to, or at the very least, you have to try, because if the audience starts recognizing you're playing favorites, which, trust me, if you are, they will, and even if you aren't, they're gonna suspect it. It's over. But genuinely, no. If I was playing a killing game and I could tell like a certain few characters were like the like teams like favorites, in the sense of like I've spoken with the Peg staff, right? And Eva is like a pretty big favorite among them because of like her character. But like, if they were the favorite in the sense of like, oh, this is just the character who like gets all the screen time, gets all the cool lines, gets everything, I'm like, I don't give a shit at this point. This is literally just fan fiction for the one character. If people even start to suspect that's the case in your story, it's over. Genuinely, you're going to lose your audience unless like you somehow manage to find it where every single member of your audience also fucks with that character heavily.
Not gonna happen.
You have to try. Yeah, remember, every character is going to be someone's favorite, even if you shaft them in terms of writing, even if you barely give them any lines.
Yeah, one like people watching exercise that I've been doing is seeing people talk about Danganronpa V3 and seeing what characters they like and dislike and why. And so many people have so many like completely different takes on those, on like basically everything about V3. Like, one person will say that this character had a ton of potential, and one person will say that they had no potential and they're just like a cardboard. V3 is just this perfect storm of every single possible interpretation being popular, and not in a good way, but in like the writing was not clear about this way.
Well, that's the thing. Interpretation is like, you kind of have to leave like some room for interpretation when it comes to your story, because if you just like spoon feed your audience literally everything, it's kind of like reading a brochure about like a museum. At that point, it's like, okay, like
You
there's
don't have
no
to go to
longer
the museum
any.
anymore.
It's not that you don't want to go to a museum anymore. It's that like there's no wonder in it. It's like, oh no, better yet, it's like explaining a magic trick. V3's writing, I can't really say much on it because I haven't played V3. I played the first two games.
Wait.
So,
yeah. You don't know
I know
about
what
V3?
happens. I know everything that happens in the story. I just
like
haven't played
secondhand.
it. Yeah, the closest I got was reading a alternative universe fanfic like during my classes when I was like 15.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, and the best part is I love pretending that I have, just to like start arguments with people about whether the writing is good or not. But like, this is the confession.
The crazy thing is, people who have watched or played V3, there will be no difference between your opinions and their opinions. Like, from me watching people who have watched or played V3 talk about the game, there is no telling like what game they played. Like, they will just say things that are just objectively untrue, and it'll be like a popular opinion. It's
I need
crazy.
to like start like agenda spreading in the V3 community then. Like, I can't say anything about V3's writing, but there's always like, you it's not that, oh, some ambiguity is good. You need to be ambiguous with your characters. I'm not saying this from like, sure, yeah, of course the theorist would say this, but I'm serious when I say this. If you tell the cast, your audience, and even worse, the cast, literally everything there is to know about a character, all of a sudden, it's less that they're a character and more so that they're like a plot beat. It's you don't know everything about the people around you, even people you're really close to. Why would a character be any different?
Right, like treat them as if they're like humans that you can't know everything about.
This reminds me that in some Fangans, no, actually, in stories in general, you'll also see the trope of a character just sort of like being there to talk less to the other characters and more so to the audience, right? Where they're just like explaining, like, oh, this character acted this way, right? If you're familiar with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, that is Koichi in Part 4, for example. Avoid that trope. That's like one of the few tropes where I would say try to avoid it, just like outright, or at the very least make it clear that if you have a character like that, they're not like an all-seeing eye, and the viewer should actually be invited to like be skeptical about what they're saying or their interpretation of things.
Do you tend to like tropes?
It's liking tropes. It's like saying whether or not you like or dislike cement when building houses. Like it's there, you know, like it's a building block. Sure, yeah, a poorly done trope is very annoying, and there are certainly some tropes that get very specific and by extension are just very easy to like hit or miss. But at the end of the day, a trope is the means by which you can understand a story in broad strokes, and as such, it's very useful when it comes to like studying a story and figure out, oh, why was this peak fiction to me? What can I learn from it? And also like explaining your story or being able to understand it especially when you're just starting to write it from that perspective of like how to proceed forward. However, tropes for the sake of tropes, or a trope implemented poorly, or a trope implemented without thinking, as is the case with any sort of writing. If you write without thinking, you're just not going to get anything good. Writing, right? You can do it subconsciously, of course, especially if you get really intimate and familiar with your characters. But if you're just doing it like mindlessly, it won't turn out bad per se, but it'll be far less detailed, you know?
Yeah. Oh Jesus, I forgot what was on my mind again.
Power of yapping.
I am not yapper enough to be a YouTuber. I am on my YouTuber arc right now, and I'm discovering that I'm not a YouTuber.
Rub Ewing Day Tube.
Real. Oh, what do you think of the Danganronpa formula for writing?
I'll be real. If you're talking to a Fangan writer and they say anything other than "I love it," then you need to run away from them. Like that is. I'm so serious. I love it. Like, why else would I be so willing to dedicate my time to telling a story, multiple stories actually, explicitly using that formula? If it wasn't for the fact that I adore it, I think it's a very powerful method of telling a killing game story, of telling a story in general. Sure, yeah, it's not perfect. Nothing is, but I hope that like when it comes time for me to like work on Fangans, whether it be, you know, Tom, Law and Order, or my own project, I hope to improve on it. And when I say improve, it's not from the perspective of I can do better. It's from the perspective of this is already great. I just want to like show my own take on things, or the team I work on takes on things. And shout out Danganronpa for serious.
How about like the more like finer details of the formula, like the like buff character dying in chapter 4, or like the double murder in chapter 3?
I can see why a buff character would die in chapter 4. Like, I get it from the perspective of like, oh yeah, by this point this is to show that like, oh yeah, they can't rely on physical strength anymore. Chapter 3 double kill, I would argue, is actually a better trope than a lot of people give it credit for, because to me it serves to be the emotional bottom point of the whole game, where like human life is so devalued that like people are realizing, if I kill and get away with it, yeah, I'm like, that person's gonna die anyway, so I might as well kill them now. And
Interesting. I would say more that chapter 4 is the emotional bottom point because it's the sacrifice chapter.
That is also definitely true, but I would say the sacrifice is usually done from like the hope of allowing the students to keep living. And so that's like actually what kickstarts it. We're like, yeah, we need to keep living. Like those finer details of like how the chapters follow. I would say if someone was writing Danganronpa, like if Danganronpa just got wiped from public memory and someone just randomly started writing a game, I would be willing to bet most of the time in that situation, there would be a double kill in chapter 3. It makes sense from a pacing point. It's not necessarily the only way to go about it, but barring someone knowing about that trope and consciously trying to subvert it, it's going to happen, you know?
Interesting. What about failed kills? Like either the culprit messes up or the execution messes up?
I've seen them in like a few Fangans. And in my opinion, I haven't seen it done poorly. I think any trope can be done poorly, frankly, but as far as I can tell, failed kills are really good. They're really good because of the fact that it immediately just sort of like introduces tension beyond relief, because now you have the fallout of, oh, there's someone who's willing to kill amongst us, like for sure, without actually having to sacrifice a character to achieve it. Or a failed execution, it's like, wow, the game itself is falling apart. What does this mean for our futures, right? And you also have a character to throw in. Like Kaito in V3, for example, is probably a good example of a failed execution in a sense, because he dies on his own terms, right? And so the execution technically fails, so as to represent the like end of like the Danganronpa series in that game, as far as I'm aware. And so because of that, ultimately, when it comes to introducing things like a trope or like a certain thing, my opinion has and always will be, yeah, it can go hard in theory. Give me the full context though, because these, I can see how they can work really well. But at the same time, it's like if you're doing them for the sake of doing them, or if you're doing them mindlessly, then it becomes very easy to mess them up. Without the full context of them, it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of like saying, oh, what do you think about a story where like there's a main protagonist? Like, tell me more about the story before I have an opinion.
What do you think about the size of 16 characters for a cast? This is a question that I asked you off recording last night, but
Yeah, I could probably still answer it. Maybe I'll answer it better this time. My favorite Fangan, as in, not only, I've already told you this, so it feels kind of rehearsed, as in, not only is it near and dear to my heart perspective of a fan, but it's a big influence on me as like a maker of Fangans, is Laps, which has a cast size of 10 students. That is enough for me to be like, yeah, a cast smaller than 16, it can work. I work on the Uzujigoku Massacre with a cast of 18. That is enough for me to say it can work. Ultimately, you have to consider your cast size as an extension of how far and how much you are going to do in your story. Laps, for example, has 10 students, and I would say if it had 16, it wouldn't be the same thing in the slightest. Not at all. There would be barely anything recognizable to it. I don't even think the first death would be the first death in that case, right? And to that end, if all the staff on time were suddenly to forget 2 of the 18 cast members randomly, it would also be the same case. The amount of students you have represents the amount of potential dynamics you have, which is again the heart of the Danganronpa format. It represents how many individual characters can like factor into the story. It represents just how long a killing game can go, quite frankly. Your typical Danganronpa is prologue 5 cases and then chapter 6. Laps was prologue 2 cases and then a third tell-all case, and then the epilogue. And so because of that, ultimately, when it comes to a cast of 16, if we're talking from a pure number crunching utilitarian point of view, smaller casts are better because you have to make less stuff for them. It's like there's no way to argue against that, you know, unless like you have a cast of 16 and half of them are just like color shifted versions of the same sprite.
and that would be a disaster upon itself.
And that would be it. If you could pull that off, I would be laughing. Like if anyone could pull that off, I would be like in disbelief. Even in a written Fangan, even if you were writing a Fangan where like, yeah, I'm not making any sprites or art for this, I'm just gonna write it out. That's still a lot of characters to like keep track of and to like understand their factors in the story. And so while that is definitely a hassle, right? The more characters, the more opportunities you have to mess up an individual character. which you cannot really afford to do given that this is a killing game and your cast never gets bigger, it also means you have more opportunities to hit things off really hardly and to have characters, character dynamics, and events in the story involving characters you might have cut if you had a smaller cast that really define the tone and that give you more time in the sense of a narrative to play with your tone and themes. That's my take on the matter. I like 16 students. My game has 16. My project has 16.
Interesting. Do you think having a larger cast runs the risk of like having your central ideas be too loose or fitting too many things on the screen?
If having too many characters, I'll put it like this. If Tom's themes would be impossible to communicate, it would be a lot harder to communicate because of 18 characters, cutting it down to 16 wouldn't make it easier. I'm very serious. I don't consider that a risk at all, so long as you're actively like thinking about your theme at all times and you don't just go into it without like even considering what is the theme of your Fangan. A theme, by the way, I just want to point out, doesn't have to be an A versus B theme. It can also be a question or exploring all facets of a specific idea. Or something else. Again, go crazy.
I do think A versus B is a bit of a bare theme. What are you gonna say about hope versus despair? Or is it just hope versus despair? What does that even mean? Like, what does hope versus despair mean in Danganronpa? Does it mean anything?
I mean, like, it works well with like Trigger Happy Havoc for the simple fact that that is like the key thing about it and the whole ongoing. It's like Makoto literally survives by a sheer miracle, right? Like alter ego like locks in and saves him, which is I think like the real like kickoff for like the hope and despair. Like hope at that point, hope and despair go from being a backdrop to the game to being at the forefront throughout the whole of chapter 6. But I would say the A and B format has its merits. It has a lot of merits, actually. I don't think it should be. I say that there are different ways to approach a theme, not from the lens of like A versus B sucks, but from perspective of like never be afraid to like try something else. And when it comes to having a bigger cast, I don't think it would dilute or make your themes looser in any sense, because in actuality, sure, yeah, you have a bigger cast, but you usually only have one protagonist anyways. Or if you're doing a thing like I believe Heartless Deceit is doing, where you have the killing game and then you have the side stories, you have a protagonist for the killing game and then for the side stories. So for each mode the story is presented, you have one protagonist, and as such you have a point of view that your protagonist should never just be a shell of a person, by the way. It should be someone where like the viewer is expected to sort of deconstruct how to see things such that they're able to come to their own conclusions about the things around them. And because of that, even if there were 1,000 people in your fandom, right, with 1,002 different opinions on like your central theme, your protagonist is always going to be there to like look at it and by extension allow you, the viewer, to interpret and internalize their takes and their beliefs in the way that like you, the author, can guide them towards. Sounds a bit propaganda-ish, but you know, what can you do?
One thing I've noticed is that people's ideas on whether a protagonist has depth or not like varies wildly. For each Danganronpa protagonist, some people say that they're basically like a piece of cardboard, and some people say that they have amazing depth. And sometimes I just look at that and I think about how much of that is people imagining things. Like how can one protagonist have such different opinions on whether they're cardboard or not? Like, especially for Shuichi, some people say that he's basically nothing and he's just a piece of cardboard, and some people say that he's like, the perspective I agree with is that he has like by far the most development and depth out of any Danganronpa protagonist, but some people just think he's nothing.
I'd be willing to like bet that like a certain part of like people willing to say, oh, this protagonist is a bum or has no development or is literally just a nothing burger, is how much they agree with the protagonist's point of view and how much they're just like, yeah, this is just me. Where they sort of take what the protagonist says and it's like, yeah, I thought this. because at that point you're like, yeah, the protagonist is literally me. The way they think, it doesn't exactly strike them as being off kilter or out of the ordinary, for the simple fact that's like that's how they think, and so it doesn't strike them that this is a whole character as well. Maybe, I don't know. Again, I haven't played V3.
Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah, no, I know this is a bit of a difficult topic to have in-depth discussion about if you haven't played the actual thing, but I think that sounds plausible because another example is Damon being definitely very unlikely to agree with the audience, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone say that he's a nothing burger.
He's a piece of work for sure.
Yeah.
I swear I can. The amount of times where, like, when I was playing chapter 1 for the first time, I would be like talking to my friends and I'm like, wow, and I'm a bit more generous with how I interpret characters. I always assume good faith. That's like a rule of mine, just like with characters and people in general. And so I would say, oh, this character is doing this because of XYZ. And then Damon's internal monologue would start, and he would say quite almost all the time the literal opposite of what I was thinking. I was like,
Yeah.
hey, that's not nice.
Damon has like the most bad faith possible interpretations of everything. Which...
Yeah, like he's a very skeptical person, right? And by the way, anyone looking to like understand how to write free time events, yeah, they're really good. Especially like at least this is, for example, like when Damon is like his first free time event, Damon is like, wow, why does Alesis remember all of this about like his job as like a historian? Which makes sense for Damon to say, given that we've seen him multiple times be like, oh, I just scrubbed my memory of all the debates I've been because who cares? So it tracks with his characterization for him to have that specific thought,
Yeah, I noticed that Project Eden's Garden's free time events are much more dynamic and much more, I guess, subtle and in-depth than canon free time events. Which I found interesting. Like, it didn't feel like a free time event as much as it felt like a natural progression of the plot.
That is true, yeah. That's the thing with free time events, by the way, is because like those aren't canon, right? But at the same time, if you have like, there's this one thing in Danganronpa Live or Die, which I love, right? Is it my favorite Fangan? No, that still laps, but it's a finished English game Fangan, and I believe it's the one of 2 to reach 6 chapters. It has a sequel in the middle of being worked on, by the way.
Yeah.
And the free time events for Live or Die are, each character has 3 and they all follow a specific format: introduction to character and their talent. A character talks about an event in their past that upset them. Character tells the protagonist, you talking to me has helped me overcome said challenge and make me want to escape the killing game alive. It's a very simple format, right? However, it gets across what you need to know and is a very nice base to work off of for your own free time events. This is the basis, right? Of course, a base like this oftentimes needs to be subverted when you can, but there you go. And one character has a part of their backstory that is mentioned in their free time events that is mentioned again once they turn out to be the killer in the case, which I think is a very nice touch on the side of the developers there. And I think that's something that if you're writing a Fangan, you should consider. We're like, yeah, these are not canonical, and not only should you bring up information that's the information in free time event shouldn't be necessary to understand the character's actions throughout the game. Or no, let me specify, they shouldn't be necessary to understand the basics of a character's actions, right?
Yeah.
Like Peko, for example, in the second game, why she acts that way, you're given it throughout the first 2 cases. You just don't check your free time events, you understand why she became the chapter 2 killer, right? But by playing through her free time events, you get a certain dimensionality to it where you're able to understand that her relationship with Fuyuhiko is not just one of master and servant, but really it's one that shows a tragedy in there where Peko can literally not tell the difference between her caring for Fuyuhiko as a person and just being devoted to him as a tool. It serves to further contextualize her actions, and that is what you should be going for with a free time event. And putting in information that comes up again is a way to reward a fan of a character. Like, hey, you already know this. Congratulations.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've definitely heard criticisms of canon Danganronpa for tucking away crucial context in free time events that most people don't get to.
I can't even lie. You can't, like, if you're like a big enough Danganronpa fan and you haven't gone through all the free time events, like I don't want to be mean, but it's kind of on you. Come on, guys.
I mean that's more of a sort of thing for not super fans, like casual viewers.
Like, that's definitely the case, and that's why I say, like, you can't have your character be like, oh, when I was young, I joined the League of Killing Game Masterminds in their free time events. Because, like, come on, dude, what are you doing?
I forgot what I was gonna say again. Wow.
Darn.
What were we talking about before? Oh, since I released my teaser for my own game, I was approached by like multiple random people, virtually I mean on the internet, basically like pinged me out of nowhere and went, I also have a V3 sequel. And then I would like ask them or look into what they have, and it's like completely unrelated to what I have, but it's still sort of interesting that they came to me out of the blue and was like, hey, I also have a V3 sequel. And one of the people who did that was the creator of Live or Die.
Oh yeah, I remember you were talking about that earlier.
Yeah, and that was in the Project Eden's Garden server. They like pinged me and was like, I also have a V3 sequel, and we like talked about it, and it was interesting. They said that they thought it was like a cool thing to sort of claim being one of the very vanishingly few finished Fangans, and said that they prioritized finishing it over like some production quality. Because like if they were to aim for a more like perfectionist production quality, then it would have taken forever. And they were working with like not much manpower, and so they
2 people.
They prioritized finishing it and like starting another one and having improved in their skills over the previous one. So that was an interesting take on developing these kinds of projects. Just finishing fast and iterating and doing another one.
From my like time in the Fangan sphere, I've noticed that ultimately, Fanganronpas that finish are ones where the team ends up smaller, and furthermore, the end and beginning of the Fangan, there is a notable jump in quality, right? Or between the first and second one, and that is because, again, let's go to Lapse. Lapse was made explicitly as a learning experience for its developer. That is why I often tell people, if you're making a Fangan, treat it as a learning experience. Treat it as a way for you to like make something and to get skills out of it, right? If the priority is to learn from it, more often than not, you're going to be able to get really deep in, if not outright finish the thing, as is evident with another Lapse, Live or Die, Desperate Heart, I believe. Those are all Fanganronpas that have finished, right? And beyond that, smaller teams, right, they usually end up finishing faster, but it's not the end all be all. Because Lapse, again, like this is a really key part of my philosophy as like a creator, right? Because my Fangan, I'm just working on it solo, but that doesn't mean I like keep it to myself, right? Like I have close friends that I trust that I talk to about the story, and I'm like, hey, give me feedback on this, or what do you think of that, or yada yada yada. Because while yes, it's beneficial to work on your own, when it comes to matters of story and learning, right, you can't really learn if you don't have someone at least giving you pointers. It's one thing to do it as a learning experience, which you should. It's another thing to not have anyone who can look in and be like, you should consider doing this or that.
Yeah, like outside perspectives are always something to consider. Like you can't learn in a vacuum. Like you can like be self-taught on things, but being self-taught involves referencing things outside of yourself.
Yeah, no, straight up. Being like an autodidact, it like involves like a very serious amount of discipline, and even then, you're learning the way you would teach yourself, which is inherently going to be to some degree flawed because nobody is a perfect teacher and nobody's a perfect student. You're gonna need other people to like weigh in.
And like, I'm usually the person who does like final passes over stuff. Like, I'm the sanity checker, I'm the quality assurance. I can't do that for myself. Like, that doesn't mean that I can make my own final drafts without other people's input, because it's different when it's like me versus myself. Even when you're super like final draft brained, you still need outside input.
Like, even if you're really good, you're still stuck in your own head, you know? You need someone out of there to like help out.
Yeah. And this goes back to what we were saying about like the different departments, the art, writing, programming, whatever departments, having different perspectives, and that being very important for a team.
Exactly.
We need to start a counter of me forgetting something that I was going to follow up with.
Just
I'm
throw
gonna-
out like some silly questions if you.
I'm going to go back to the list. I'll go through a couple of little questions. Easiest and hardest characters you've written for?
Ooh, that's a good one. So, the easiest character I've written for. Oh, that's a tough one. I'm going to exclude my own characters for the simple sake of like that is a whole different conversation. The easiest character I've written for, and I'm also going to talk about like when I'm part of the team. So I'm not going to mention like any fanfic I've written. Both of these answers are probably going to be Tom. Easiest one has to be either Satoshi or at times Nanako, and the hardest, I think I've said this before, but it's Tadaharu, because again, if I don't watch myself, I can make Vivzy Pop look like fucking Mother Teresa and write dialogue.
It is just as funny the second time. Like, that is a sentence. That is a quote. Tadaharu
It's true,
Vivzy Pop
unfortunately.
wrote it.
Yeah, like that's why for my projects I like explicitly set the hard limit of no swears, no cussing, aside from like damn and whatnot. Not because, you know, I'm trying to make the first ever child-friendly killing game, but because again, I really don't want it to be a crutch for me. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, when you talk normally, you don't swear either. Like, is that like a similar thing?
Believe it or not, I'm actually putting a lot of effort into like keep my words PG-13. You should hear me when like I'm just like completely like laid back.
You've got an off switch for the word filter.
Yeah, exactly. Like no, the moment is just like, oh, I know it's like all bets off. Oh god. Hear me in Arabic actually. It's even worse.
Why are Satoshi and Nanako easy for you?
When I write a character, a key part of it is getting into the mind of said character. Another key part is being able to express how they feel and being able to just understand how they would say things. These are all really important parts of it. And I find that Satoshi and Nanako, another like responsibility of mine is doing backstories, right? And because of that, these are a couple of the backstories where like I got it, you know?
Like, you had the perfect idea?
Like, yeah, when I was like doing them, it's like, yeah, I understand this. I understand it now. And beyond that, like the way they talk, I'm really inspired by Ace Attorney when it comes to dialogue. Like, I really like pushing characters over the top in terms of mannerisms and whatnot. And these are the two where like I find myself really at home.
I see. Yeah, Ace Attorney has some very good mannerisms and expressions. One thing that my voice actor friend has is that he likes to put characters in archetypes and conceptualize them as archetypes. And it like simplifies things. Is it like a similar thing to that?
Honestly, I don't really. It's not that like I'm averse to it. It's just that I just kind of don't really bother with doing stuff like that. I'm just like, I have a central thing I want to explore in a character, or like when it came to like Tom backstories, for example, I would get like the notes, and then I would like just completely go through everything. Sometimes I don't change anything. Sometimes I like let me make a minor change. Some characters, no, I would make like it wouldn't be like I would completely rewrite it, but I would add in like a couple of big changes because in my opinion like that would elevate the character. So I don't go out of my way to look for like tropes or to look for like archetypes of characters. I understand ultimately though a character might wind up like appearing similar to an archetype or trope because again those are the building block of stories and it's inevitable at some point. But it's less so trope and more so a central question or theme. Like with my own characters, for example, I usually try to start off with like a sentence or two, like character X deals with Y, and because of that Z, and then I just expand it into a full backstory.
It's like a natural consequence of certain details. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have like a particular archetype or trope that you like? It could be like one that's pretty basic or one that is more of a guilty pleasure.
Yeah, I have one. It's almost embarrassing to say, but like recently I've been getting really into like those, like, those like manga and like comics about like getting reincarnated into like an otome video game. I've been really getting into the like villainess trope, especially like subversions of it, like the
Oh,
I think it's called Ojo-sama. Yeah, that stuff. Oh, I have a soft spot for it. I'm sorry.
what's the subversion of it?
You have I'm in love with the villainess. You have all the like ones where someone's reincarnated into the villainess. I'm a big fan of ones where like I don't like. It's not that I'm opposed to ones where it's like, oh, the villainess is actually like a really sweet person, but I really like the one where like, oh yeah, the villainess is still kind of like annoying to be around, but like if you keep at it, eventually she'll tolerate you. You know.
I don't read that kind of stuff, so I have like nothing to add to that.
I read a lot, like, and I try to make sure I read as varied as possible. For the simple fact that you don't know where inspiration is going to strike you. Like, I was watching this one Fangan, which was made with like screenshots from Yandere Simulator, right? And like, I'm serious. It's called Comulator, and it's really campy, but I find it endearing because the wherewithal to like take all these screenshots and then edit them together rather than just like write the thing or like do anything else. It's like, wow, no, I have to respect it. Game respects game. And there are some things in it that I feel like I've already said this to you before, but like, for example, the way each chapter ends, like that is something I'm just taking piecemeal for my own thinking. And some of the ideas in it are really, really good, right? It's that sort of campy, cheesy, dramatic Fangin that I just can't help but like feel really affectionate for. And even outside of Fangins, just like stories and music and articles and whatever, like I like to get my hands on as many like academic journals as possible because surprisingly they end up being a very good source on backstories. I recall there was one Tom backstory that took me a hot minute to find because I had to find like documents on like pre-Islamic Libyan mythology.
Interesting.
Yup, not saying who though.
That'll be for the theorists to decide.
Yeah, they hear that and be like, what the fuck do we make of this? What do we do?
Tell us a funny story about Fangan development.
Okay. I have a few. I'm gonna tell you one that like I think I've already told you before. So it goes like this. So Tom development, right? We recruit some new writers and well, they're all American. And we decide, hey, let's onboard them. Let's get to know one another. We all hop on VC. So it's me, the directors, as well as the rest of the writing team. So it's like me and like 5 or 6 other people. And also like a couple of artists as well from America. So everyone's talking. They're talking about like what states they're from. I throw in oh, you guys, all your accents sound the same to me. Like, be for real, right? And we're just having fun. I'm a bit quiet though, because again, I'm not from the States. And Queen, right? The director, good friend of mine. He's like, oh, I want to make sure he doesn't feel like neglected in the conversation. So he just like speaks. And it's like, well, Humbugg, what state are you from? And I'm just like, man, I'm not American. Why are you asking me that?
there was an attempt.
I appreciate it. Hey, it's like such a funny story to reflect on.
It's like, thanks, I'm from the state of non-America.
Yeah, I am not American.
That's one of those
Like-
things where it's kind of like things come out of your mouth, and sometimes they make sense.
I mean, to be fair to him, there's an alternative universe where like I'm half Floridian, which is like scary to think about, but like it's out there.
Oh yeah, being half Floridian, that would be horrifying.
Yeah, no, because like my dad, he was like studying there, right?
Oh no.
It's where he like trained to be a doctor, and like he was really, really close with like the head of his department, and she was like, you know what, I want my daughter to marry this guy, and so she would invite him all the time out to like vacations, just the three of them. And my dad, right, he's like so focused on making money, he's like, oh, she's just doing that to be nice, and he didn't realize until he was out of the States what she was like trying to do.
Oh my god. I didn't realize that you were being serious when you said that you could have turned out half Floridian.
Yeah, it's such an unserious thing. It's like, oh my god, that could have been me.
It sounded so much like a bit that I was just like, oh, this is just like a random state that's memed upon a lot. No, that actually almost happened.
Yeah, no, it's like a lot of these things that like happen to me sound like off-kilter humor, honestly.
Life is stranger than fiction, something reality.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's see. Do I have any other like hot take questions?
I love hot takes because I love controversy. When I grow up, I want to be a source of drama.
Yeah. I don't think I have any more hot take questions. Unfortunate.
Darn.
What story elements do you want to see more of or done better in Fangans?
It's kind of like makes me want to say that when it comes to writing, if someone really knew what they wanted to see, they wouldn't be waiting for it, they would be making it, you know? And so like a lot of things I want to see in a Fangan are probably going to come up in my Fanganronpa, but outside of that, I don't really know how to answer that question. I feel like I honestly I want to see people more willing to break the rules when it comes to the Danganronpa format. Not even just a thing about like, oh, a misvote or a failed execution, just like fundamentally tearing like the structure of a game apart, you know, however one chooses to approach that.
Yeah, like finding new and interesting ways to destroy the game.
Yeah, just like with all these killing games happening, surely there has to be like at least one where like someone in the just like, I don't know, starts like blowing stuff up, you know what I'm saying?
Like trying to like cause some chaos and see if something beneficial happens in the fallout.
Yeah, not even like from the point of view of like antagonists antagonizing for the sake of like, oh, it's for my master plan. It's just like tearing the game itself apart, you know? That's all I can say. But otherwise, the stuff I want to see in a killing game, they'll be in my own, you know?
Yeah. I think failed murders was one thing that I was thinking about recently, because humans are hard to kill, and I think people underestimate how much a human can take before they die. So I think it would be both interesting and realistic for culprits to fail. That was one thing I was thinking of when I wrote that question.
I agree with you, by the way. Like I said when the question was first asked, it introduces drama of like, oh my god, there's a specific individual here we know is willing to kill without having to have a character die in order to prove that.
It's also that that person is gonna have a hard time as well, because one, they might like start having second thoughts about what they did, and also they're gonna have a hard time killing again. How is the development process impacted by a project being a fan work or otherwise unpaid?
So the single biggest thing is definitely going to be motivation, because people aren't just driven by like a profit motive, right? But at the same time, it's definitely a like big help. And beyond that, like if it's your own project, then it's like, oh, I really want to do this, right? As long as you keep up that motivation. But when it comes to other members of staff, it's always going to be a question of their investment in the project, what they want to gain out of it. Because some people, they're not working on a project because they believe in it so much and they need the world to see it. They're doing it for like their portfolio or as a favor to staff or a mix of many other things. And that is fine, because at the end of the day, as long as they're, working alongside you, they're working alongside you. And another thing is that it's very important to manage the expectations and to keep good terms with your staff, because as I say, when it comes to like collaboration, if you cannot offer money, you have to offer the ability to collaborate. You have to offer your time. You have to offer the willingness to hear them out, to have them have a say in like how things go, whether it be for the story or otherwise. If you can't pay them with money, you pay them with everything else. That's how it goes. So it's a environment where, like, not to say that a paid environment you can't like collaborate on or anything, absolutely not, but it's a environment where you really need to offer collaboration. And like in order, for example, it doesn't really have any like team leads or anything to ensure that like everyone's on like equal footing, that there's not one person who has the final say in everything.
That's really interesting. I've never seen like a case of that succeeding before, so I'm really curious how that works.
Of course, there's a director, right? But the way it works is that ultimately, I am fairly new to the team, so it's not like I have everything just like downloaded, right? But when it comes down to it, each team member, especially in the writing team, it usually serves as like, hey, here are the tasks we need you to do. And when it comes down to like talking about the overall scope or the overall like direction of the game, because a lot of the main story beats are set, what usually is discussed is like the execution of them, which is when like people are just kind of on equal footing and they're able to like express their views.
Interesting. I'm like thinking about my own project experience right now, and there is one group I'm in where there aren't any clear leads. But the kinds of projects we do are like multiple small projects or like projects that don't involve everyone. We're a music group, so it's like different. And one thing that happens is that leaders emerge from within us. Like people defer to what like the producer working on a certain song says because they get the final say. And people defer to like what I say about the visual presentation because they like trust my artistic abilities, and like I have like a sort of leadership personality, so people tend to defer to me even when I'm like not the official manager. So it's interesting to hear about sort of attempts at there not being a leadership structure, because like in the projects that I've worked on, there have been naturally formed leadership structures where there aren't like official ones.
All right. Yeah, like when it comes to like leadership structures, I think I can't say anything about what's going to be like in the next 3-6 months, because how can anyone like exactly predict it? But yeah, from the very beginning, I especially feel like a Fanganronpa or any sort of fan project, it makes sense for there to be a sort of less focus on a specific leader being present, because of the fact that, yeah, at the end of the day, that sort of collaboration, the prioritization of collaboration is actually kind of a necessity to allow a project to really flourish and to have the staff members in any department feel like, yeah, we're free to really flex our creative muscles. Like in TUM, for example, the music staff, as it stands, it's really just they're sent inspiration for a track, or they're given a general overview of the vibe or the like theme of a track, and they're just left to go at it, because as I put it, they're musicians. They know what they're doing.
That's one thing that I think about sometimes, is trusting the person with the skill. On one hand, you should definitely like put trust into that person so that they can do their job, and so that like they're the most well-informed person to make certain decisions. On the other hand, sometimes people claim to be more confident than they are, and you can't tell because you don't know. What are your views and experience on that?
I have a lot of things to say, because I have indeed been that overconfident person before. And I will say, when it comes to that, it's either a process of they will eventually bow out, out of just realizing I'm not cut out for this, or they go radio silent, or they start like seriously going at it in the hopes of improving, which again is, in my opinion, the main thing and the main reason to make a fangan as a learning process. And to that end, I will say, yeah, if someone is overly confident, it can be a hassle at times. But you know what? Maybe it's because I've been that person, but I'm going to say that it's not that bad. Sometimes you got to be a bit cocky in order to really get stuff done.
I definitely think fangans are sort of a special case in terms of being a learning experience. Like, half of the reason why I'm writing a V3 sequel rather than my own thing is so that I cannot treat it as my magnum opus. I have a strong tendency to be more perfectionist and expect higher quality out of myself. And because I'm making a fan work that depends heavily on another work that's someone else's intellectual property, this cannot be my magnum opus. Like, it gives me more permission to make mistakes and learn. And this whole project that I have is my get good arc. And I think that's something that can be said about fan works, is they're more experimental and they're more conducive to growth, I think.
Exactly, because you already have a base. Like, for example, a fan work not straight up using the characters from the series is inspired by, oftentimes, like in a fangan, it's going to be using the base of the story, which means that the thinking for how that works has already been done for you. You have the time to experiment with it. And furthermore, knowing the fact that commercial viability was never in the question, you can sort of go nuts with it, to speak a bit bluntly. And beyond that, like when it comes to my own project, right? I approach it from the lens of it's a learning experience. It's also the time for me to start like getting feelers for ideas that I would love to explore in like my own original work. For example, there are themes that I'm not going to say out loud here, but that are integral to that fangan. And I hope, right, when it comes time for me to work on my own original stuff, that experience will allow me to have developed, my mentality as to how I approach communicating it in my own work. Much the same for Tum, much the same for Law and Order, much the same for any fangan I find myself associated with.
And what do you think some other pros and cons are for making a fangan or fan work versus making an original project with a similar concept?
So, in comparison to an original project, whatever, a fangan, right? It will always have the benefit of people are going to be into it. You, hopefully, are a fan of Danganronpa working on a fangan. And by extension, you will have at least some vague awareness of the idea of a fangan, especially if you yourself are making one. You know that there's an audience for these types of games, these type of works. And as such, you can rest assured that if you build it, they will indeed come. How many and when, that's for later to discover, but people will see it and people will be interested in it and be willing to give it a chance. Also, the whole learning opportunity, though that's not unique to a Fanganronpa. Sure, a Fanganronpa can uniquely offer a specific sort of environment, but you will always learn from whatever you make. Now, the cons, there's a whole like, oh, you can't make money off of this. And there's also the fact that people have expectations for a Fanganronpa. You will often see on the Fanganronpa subreddit, people will say things along the lines of, being too committed to following the Danganronpa tropes isn't that interesting, but these are people who make Fanganronpas most of the time. Ergo, they're the type who want to flex their creative muscles. Now, I'm not going to say that Fanganronpa fan will hunt you down if you break away from even one trope, not in the slightest. However, people know what they like, and as such, to break away from the tropes of Danganronpa, you're going to have to justify it in a sense. You're going to have to be able to, like, if one as a viewer is seeing it, you're going to have to see and be like, oh, I understand why this was done, and I really enjoy how it was done, right? Because it's not necessarily that every difference you have is going to be scrutinized and be a reason for people to dislike you, but it is certainly going to be something that people will notice and pick up upon. And ergo, you know what, yeah, it will lead to some more scrutiny, but not in a way where it's inherently going to be negative or just for the sake of like tearing you down.
Right, like when people have something existing to base their expectations off of, they will have more like, I guess, specific expectations. One thing that reminded me of was me posting my teaser and then getting a ton of like comments as well as people in my Discord being like, oh, what if this thing happens? I really hope this thing happens. It's not gonna happen. And like,
It's not gonna.
there's people being like, oh, what if the people who died in V3 are actually alive and you get to meet their like pre-game versions? And I'm like, no.
Like, that's not the direction. That's a very like interesting thing to bring up, by the way, because I was talking to some peg staff, and this is something that like just as a writer you need to keep in mind. Ultimately, ultimately, you yourself are defining what the story is, right? The story is what you want it to be, and this is a very important thing to remember. You can justify it. You can do whatever you want. Like I'm serious. You've got free will when it comes to this sort of stuff.
Yeah, and this one person like was messaging me like, oh, what if Monica Toa from Ultra Despair Girls is in this? And I'm like, no. And they're like, but what if she was in this? And I was like, no. So I've already had some very large number of interesting experiences regarding people coming in with expectations and hopes that will just not be satisfied.
Yeah. I know, like, for my project, I sent like the full script to like a close friend of mine, and I asked them for their like death order predictions, and like I look at it and I'm like, no. No.
It's always a little bit sad to know that people's hopes and dreams are not going to come true.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like, not even like just for Tom or my own project, but like every project I ever worked on, like seeing people gush over characters who I know are not making it, you know?
Having all these hopes and dreams about a character's potential.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. No more potential. How long is too long for a fangan?
Are we talking just like as for the whole thing, or like for the prologue, or?
You can say for like prologue and chapters or the whole thing.
When it starts feeling long, which is a cop-out answer, but really it's the only right one, because a fangan, the prologue could be 500,000 words, but if it's got people like being intrigued and wanting to see the next like massive paragraph, then like it's fine, right? It's long, but it's not too long. It can be 500 words, but if it feels like a drag, firstly, it's impressive to make 500 words feel like a drag, but secondly, yeah, it's too long. Like my prologue, for example, is the first draft was 17,700 words, and the current one is 25,100 words. Tums, I'm not going to say. All I'm going to say, it's much longer than that.
Yeah, one thing that I found interesting was that I was playing through Project Eden's Garden with my friend, and with the same friend, we were he was like watching through V3, and for both at various points he was like, oh my god, can we get to the point already? And like much earlier than I would get to that point of can we get to the point already. So it was an interesting study on how much different people are willing to sit through nothing, and also how much people consider something to be nothing.
Yeah, no, I think there's another part of it where it's that not only is it just about how much they're willing to sit through, but it's also the fact that like at the end of the day, like for example, if two people are playing like the same game and I like put in a scene where it's just like some of the characters, some fluff, right, in order to develop the characters' relationships, just like cool things down, a person who is more attached to them is more willing to sit through that scene than someone who hates them or someone who doesn't care about them, right? So another key thing is that you have to make sure your characters, again, there's always the whole, every character is going to be someone's favorites, but you have to make sure your characters are intriguing enough where like someone would be willing to sit through like a scene that on its surface doesn't appear to develop the story or legitimately is like side shadowing. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual story. Because like, to use like another example from Eden's Garden, I'm not a big fan of Wolfgang Akire, yet at the same time I am intrigued of him. So whenever I see his scenes, I'm like, okay, yeah, let me lock in and see what he's doing.
Yeah, like I think having the characters that the audience doesn't like having them still be interested, I think that's a mark of good writing. If you as a viewer are like, I don't like this character, but I still want to see what's happening, that's the mark of success.
Yeah, like, of course, in my case, I'm like, you know how I get about Eden's Garden, so it's a bit like, yeah, of course he would say that. But a character being likable as a person, doesn't have much to do with how interesting they are. I think Oscar Wilde said it once, the worst thing a character can do isn't be evil, it's being boring. Right? As long as there's always a question to ask about a character and there's the potential of having that question answered, they're going to be interesting, which loops back to what I said earlier. At the end of the day, you don't want to like show your hand when it comes to a character and tell people, yeah, this is literally everything you need to know about them, because all of a sudden that's not a character anymore, it's a plot point.
And like, I think it's easy to get someone to be interested in a character they either really like or really hate, but like, if you feel kind of lukewarm about a character, but you still are interested in where the character is going, yeah.
Because you need to be really, like, I've been constantly saying this during this whole interview, you need to be really economical with like your characters. Your cast is not getting bigger in a killing game. You need to make sure every last one of them, it should be to the point where you can pick a random character to put on screen and there's tension because of it, right? Where it's like, oh, what's going to happen? What am I going to get from this character? Otherwise, it's not that you failed. It's never that you failed. It's just that you're kind of...
Miss potential?
You're missing your potential. Not only for the character's sake, but for your sake as a writer. Just like to the general audience,
That's an interesting point. Like, get a random number generator and be like, 2 random characters, what are they going to do?
That I would consider the gold standard for writing, by the way. Like, especially for, not just for a Fangan, but like for any like dynamic focused story, that is your gold standard. The silver standard is being able to remove the names on a script and being able to tell who's speaking at any one time. The gold standard is being able to take any 2 characters at random in your cast and understanding how they interact.
Oh.
Because if you have a cast of 16, that is... what is it? That's 240 possible interactions that can happen, right? Of course, that's not counting duplicates, so it's 120, but you know what I'm getting at.
You said that the silver standard is being able to remove the characters' names and still know what they're saying, who's saying what. By silver standard, do you mean like that's less an indication of writing quality, or that
it's a stepping stone? It's still an impressive thing to do, and you shouldn't like, if you can achieve that, you shouldn't say like, it's not that great. No, that's quite impressive and very important. It's just that is on the individual character level. Once you're able to start understanding character dynamics, which gets a lot more complicated because it features double the characters as a single character, then you're like, yeah, you're really getting up there.
What do you think about characters that stand more on their own as interesting characters versus characters that are only interesting when paired with other characters, like they exist as a foil?
A foil that only is interesting in comparison to another character is not a foil, that is an accessory at that point. You need to avoid that in your writing. Which is, it feels kind of basic to say it, but like a character being a foil, ultimately it's only interesting if you can explore that character individually. Like if you have character A who's like a goody two shoes with a tragic backstory, and then you have character B who has the exact same tragic backstory but is a lot more like derisive or whatnot, they can serve as very strong foils of one another. But if all character B is doing is just naysaying character A all the time, that is literally just like a hater at that point. There's nothing to them, right? You need to allow character B to have some time to breathe and to act as a character outside of character A's existence. And furthermore, having them interact with other characters in other environments gives you the opportunity to pose the question of, would character A have acted like this? If what, no, then why? What is really the difference between the two of them?
Right, because there's like a danger of making foils too like overlapping too much.
Foils as like characters they're like a really key thing, because you should, especially if you like, the protagonist as a character needs to have a foil, because otherwise they're going throughout the story unchallenged by like literally anyone except like the killing game itself, which like we know what a killing game is, you know? Like we know that like you can die. Give us something else to be stressed about as a viewer.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. Sometimes you say things that I already know, but you just put it in like a way that's just 200 times better.
Again, like you make me blush, but like it's one thing to like know something, but once you're able to put it into words, it becomes a lot more actionable. You know, getting something out of your head and spoken out, or better yet, written down,
That's
it
very
makes all the
true.
difference. And to anyone listening to this with your own idea for a project, start writing things down. Start writing, even if it's like a note, just like write it down, throw it in a box, forget about it until it's time to like look through it. That's advice that like my dad gave me when I was like a little kid, and I wish I took it earlier, honestly.
The parental wisdom pulling through.
Mm-hmm.
That's also why teaching people is a very good learning process, because it crystallizes what you know and makes it more explicit and more refined.
Yeah, exactly. Which is like why something like this is very useful, might I say, because I have to respond to these questions. And if you can't respond to a question, you know, with like any sort of actual advice, then you don't know what you need to know.
For a number of these questions, you've said like, oh, this is a good question, this is a thoughtful question, and then you pause and think about it for a second, and then you come out with this very detailed and thoughtful explanation that you probably had never thought consciously before, but was in your head the whole time. Like, I could sort of hear that happening for a lot of these questions.
I like think with my mind and stuff, you know?
How do you keep track of information when writing a complex story?
A lot of the time, I know I just said, oh, you need to write down everything about your like story. So this is gonna sound hypocritical, but like a lot of it is just like in my head, which is why I sleep a lot, because my mind's always active, right? But when it comes time to like understand like the day by day, I just open up Google Docs and I like start breaking it down into notes. The way I structure is like I'll have a document for like the day-to-day events. This isn't just for my own projects. This has been for the more successful projects I've been on. Also follow this method, this like in some way, shape, or form. You'll have a document for like the day-by-day events. Then you'll have a document or documents for character backstories. You'll have on occasion documents detailing specific dynamics. Like for example, in Tom a while back, I was tasked with writing like specific things explaining specific dynamics between characters in order to understand their place in the overall story, like character A and character B interact. Why is this, and what themes does this hit on that we have already established? You'll have a master document. You'll have a document pertaining to like I've written things before, like saying like, oh, this character dies at this time. Why is this the case? You'll have things related to the aesthetics. You'll have things related to everything. Is that at the end of the day, the answer is simple. I just write down everything in like Google Docs. I know Obsidian. Some people favor Obsidian because it lets you like connect things, but I'm just like, I can't be bothered to use it. I no like hate against it or anything. It's just like I got Google Docs. It's working. It works good enough.
The connections are like already pretty strong in your head, so you don't have to like draw it out. I see.
Yeah, I think about not just Tom, not just my own projects, just like any project I'm involved in. I think about the characters a lot, which means that like I'm consistently like again rotating them in my head like rotisserie chickens.
I was about to bring that up as well. That quote. Yeah, it's definitely impressive that you can like maintain such strong connections in your brain. I think that's one of the major roadblocks that I'm running into when like planning a story is there are too many things and I can't fit them in my head.
If it helps, I've been a writer on Tom for like a year and 7 months, and my own project, right? I would say it mainly like started in like September 2023 when I like locked in, and even then I would call it like February of last year where like I started seriously making progress. No, April actually. But even then, I've been thinking about it since like January of 2021, so it's been 4 years and I've had it in my head. So it's simply the longer you do it, the stronger those connections are.
That makes sense. And your remark about sleeping a lot, like obviously sleep helps form connections and helps solidify things in your memory, it's like plausible or believable that the more you sleep over the course of the project, the more solidified things are in your head.
Yeah, because I'm a very sleepy person, and it ends up like benefiting me a lot.
That's your secret sauce. That's how you're able to like have so many thoughts, is you sleep so much.
Yeah, exactly. Oftentimes, like, I'll what's it called? I'll like have ideas just as I'm like going to bed, which is why I have like a big like in my notes app, I like have a big thing for like my project, which I genuinely, it might have hit like over like a several thousand words at this point, because like I'll just put in like essays and like snippets of writing and like like notes for like my planning and all that.
Do you intentionally do stuff related to your projects right before bed in order to capitalize on like the sleeping thing?
No, it's just that just before I go to bed, I'm kind of like predisposed to start thinking. Depending on what I've done during the day, if I've done a lot of writing, for example, what I'll do is I'll do a cool down, right? After like everything, in order to make sure my mind isn't restless before I go to bed. Usually involves writing a short story. Sometimes it's for my own project, sometimes it's just a fanfic, but whatever like, strikes my fancy at that particular moment.
You really like writing.
I've been writing like since I remember, because like my mom, like, she taught me English, and she taught me like the awesomeness of like telling stories. So I think it might have been like since I was 6, I've been dreaming stuff up, right? And like when I was about 12, I was like, I want to really take this seriously. And now I'm 19, and like I've just been like chugging along, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Is writing like your like one thing, or do you have like other things?
I think I'm pretty okay at art. I'm pretty good at cooking. I can dance fairly well. I can I make music? No, I can't. I'm not that good.
Making music is a very steep and difficult learning curve.
Yeah, I have friends who make music, and it's kind of scary. I'm pretty okay with video editing. Writing is like the thing I consider myself the best at. Like, just not even the thing is like, oh, I'm just a goat at it, but it's something where like I can admit that yes, I have like some skill at this, And the others, like, yeah, I'm okay at them, and I kind of have to be, because again, one-man band with my own projects.
Yeah, doing a solo project is definitely one way to really flex those learning muscles.
Yeah, exactly. It's either like do or die at that point.
There's definitely something to be said about the balance between specialization and a general spread of skills. There's a certain middle ground that's most beneficial.
Exactly, yeah. But at the same time, I would tell anyone, some people will tell you to specialize and to focus on one thing, but at the end of the day, don't let that be in sacrifice in like wanting to do what you want to do, or trying to like make what you want to make. Even if it means you won't be like a maestro at something by the time you're 25 or 30, it's well worth it if there's something you really like want to show the world,
And being good at other things will deepen your skills in that one thing. I don't think you would be as good as writing for Fangans if you didn't like at least have a certain amount of understanding of how art worked.
Exactly. That's especially true because like one of the places I got started when it came to like seriously writing was like comic books and web comics, right? And like when it comes to that medium, if you don't at least have like a basic grasp on like the art of paneling and like art and whatnot, you are not going to be able to be as effective when it comes to like writing out scripts and like whatnot.
And like in order to be an interesting writer, you to some extent you have to be an interesting person, right?
Exactly. If you don't have much life experiences to draw on, or at the very least knowledge to draw on, you're just kind of out of luck, Like that is, for example, why I'm really into like reading ethnography papers, right? Because a lot of those, I've already said this in this interview, but a lot of them serve to be big influences in my writing. I'm a big fan of like Kuwaiti history, and I would say that has and continues to be like the single biggest influence in like how I like approach writing, even though well, it's not that obvious at times, but sometimes it does get so,
Yeah. Is there any other like general stuff you want to wrap this up with?
I'm just gonna leave this off with one last note, and this that to anyone like listening to this, if you want to make a Fangan or an original project or anything in between, right? I'm gonna tell you this: it's gonna be tough.
Yes.
It's going to be hard. It's going to be annoying at times. However, you're going to be tempted to fall into the trap of believing that it is your passion that will get you to the end, right? That it is excitement that gets you there. That is not true. Sure, yes, as has been said before, we do as passion commands because there is no price for passion. At the end of the day, what puts one foot after another isn't just blind excitement, but it is motivation and discipline. And perhaps at times, one's excitement and passion cannot build motivation, but one's discipline will always build their passion for something. So as long as you realize that it is not just about, being excited to do something, but being willing to like put in the hours and not look at like your work schedule through rose-tinted glasses, you'll get there.
So true. Spitting actual facts. One thing that my dad has told me is that passion comes from skill, and that building skill means building passion.
Ooh, I'm stealing that.
And in the same vein, putting in work on the project builds passion. So yeah, that's what you just said is extremely true. And that is a great note to leave off because our time is up, and this was a very, very juicy conversation that I think a lot of people,
honor talk with you. Yeah.
a lot of people in the sphere will very much be interested in hearing and having their own thoughts on, perhaps. Thank you so much for having this interview. This was amazing. I'm so glad we did this.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was really nice talking to you about all of this, Brian. Just talking about like the intricacies of making a Fangan and really just making any creative work. It's something I really enjoyed.
Yeah, and I think if we want to like get on and yap about something some other time, I'm always like open to do that.
Ooh, hell yeah.
We shall see. Anyway, my time is up, so goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye bye.